The Galactic Energy Consortium had been running on the same bureaucratic principles for over 47,000 years, which explained both its remarkable stability and its spectacular inability to handle anything resembling common sense. Picture, if you will, an organization so committed to proper procedure that it took 14 committees, 37 forms, and a ceremonial blessing from the Ethereal Oversight Board just to approve a request to change the temperature setting on a space heater. Now imagine this same organization being responsible for managing the energy output of every star in 3 galactic arms. Naturally, they were doing a bang-up job. The consortium's headquarters orbited a neutron star that pulsed with the mechanical precision of a cosmic metronome, which the founding species had chosen specifically because they believed regular, predictable energy signatures promoted efficient thinking. What they had actually created was the administrative equivalent of water torture, where every decision took exactly as long as neutron star radiation took to complete one full cycle. Coincidentally, this was also roughly the same amount of time it took for most species to evolve past the need for whatever decision was being made. The Centauri delegates, with their 4-dimensional thinking capabilities and tendency to perceive time as a navigable river, spent most meetings arguing about decisions that wouldn't need to be made for another millennium. The crystalline Phylaxians approached every problem by forming consensus among their trillion-member hive minds, which would have been efficient if they could ever agree on what constituted a problem in the first place. The energy-based ethers communicated through controlled stellar flares, making every conversation a potential navigation hazard for nearby shipping lanes. Into this carefully calibrated chaos had stumbled humanity, roughly 18 months ago Galactic Standard Time, when a clerical error of truly spectacular proportions had somehow classified Sol as a secondary administrative zone requiring immediate oversight integration. The error had occurred when a junior filing clerk, whose species experienced reality in 17 dimensions but had trouble with basic arithmetic, had misplaced a decimal point while updating star classification. By the time anyone noticed, humanity had already received their official star management certification, complete with a ceremonial plasma wrench and a user manual written in 47 languages, none of which were human. The consortium's response to this mistake was typically bureaucratic. Rather than admit error, they decided to see what happened. After all, the worst-case scenario was that humans would accidentally destroy their own star, which would solve the administrative problem while providing valuable data about species-level competence assessment. It was the kind of win-win thinking that had kept the consortium functioning for millennia. The human maintenance crew assigned to Sol approached stellar management with the same casual competence they brought to fixing household appliances. They had set up their operational base in what used to be the International Space Station, though they had since expanded it with the kind of enthusiastic welding and creative engineering that made alien safety inspectors develop nervous twitches. The station now resembled a cosmic garage, complete with spare parts floating in organized chaos and the distinct odor of coffee that had somehow permeated vacuum-sealed living quarters. The crew chief, a former aerospace engineer, who had spent 20 years explaining to military contractors why their minor design modifications violated several laws of physics, treated the stellar regulator controls with the same mixture of respect and skepticism he reserved for anything that came with more than 3 warning labels. The regulator itself was a marvel of alien engineering, roughly the size of a city block and covered in controls that pulsed with colors that didn't exist in human visual spectrum. The instruction manual, when translated into English, read like a combination of advanced quantum mechanics and interpretive poetry. "So this button adjusts solar flare intensity," the chief muttered to his second-in-command, a mechanical engineer who had learned alien technology by applying the universal principle that everything was basically plumbing if you squinted hard enough. "And this one modulates core fusion rate. What do you suppose this one does?" He pointed to a control that seemed to exist in several dimensions simultaneously. "According to the manual, it harmonizes the stellar essence with the cosmic substrate to achieve optimal photonic distribution across dimensional matrices," came the reply, delivered with the flat tone of someone reading insurance policy fine print. "Right. So it's the dimmer switch." This was exactly the kind of reasoning that made alien observers break out in species-appropriate equivalents of cold sweats. The consortium had developed stellar management protocols over tens of thousands of years, incorporating the wisdom of civilizations that had transcended physical existence and achieved pure energy consciousness. Humans had been on the job for 18 months and had already started color-coding the controls with duct tape. The routine maintenance schedule called for a minor adjustment to Sol's luminosity output, a delicate procedure that typically required a full committee review, environmental impact assessment, and approval from at least 3 transcendent beings. The human approach was considerably more direct. The chief looked at the readouts, noted that the star was running about 3% brighter than specifications called for, and reached for what he had determined was the dimmer switch. What happened next would later be analyzed by xenosociologists as a perfect example of human problem-solving methodology, which could be summarized as try something and see what happens. The control didn't respond to gentle adjustment, so the chief applied what maintenance manuals euphemistically called percussive encouragement. When that failed to produce results, his second-in-command suggested they check if anything was The investigation revealed that alien engineering, for all its dimensional transcendence and cosmic harmony, apparently suffered from the same basic problem as human engineering. Sometimes things just got stuck. A minor debris accumulation had jammed the stellar regulator's primary control interface, preventing fine adjustments and causing the system to default to what the manual called emergency preset configurations. The solution was elegantly human in its directness. While alien engineers would have convened a study committee to develop a debris extraction protocol, possibly involving consultation with beings who existed as pure mathematics, the human crew simply gave the stuck mechanism a solid whack with their ceremonial plasma wrench. The regulator unstuck with a satisfying click that somehow transmitted through vacuum. For approximately 3 seconds, everything worked perfectly. Sol's output dropped to precisely the specifications outlined in the consortium's stellar management guidelines, a level of accuracy that would have made the Centauri weep tears of 4-dimensional joy if they had possessed tear ducts. Then the control interface, apparently suffering from what human engineers recognized as catastrophic overcorrection syndrome, decided that if a 3% reduction was good, a 100% reduction was obviously better. Sol went out like a blown fuse. The silence that followed was the kind of cosmic quiet that usually preceded either enlightenment or apocalypse. In this case it preceded something considerably more interesting than either, though it would take the galaxy's finest minds approximately 6 hours to stop screaming long enough to notice. In the darkness that suddenly enveloped 8 planets and several billion humans, something that had been hiding behind the sun's glare for longer than most civilizations had existed, decided that perhaps it was time to stop hiding. The first thing that happened after Sol winked out of existence was that every emergency protocol in the Galactic Consortium activated simultaneously, creating what could charitably be described as organized pandemonium, and more accurately called a bureaucratic meltdown of cosmic proportion. Emergency committees formed emergency committees to discuss the formation of additional emergency committees. The Centauri immediately began calculating the probability matrices for stellar restoration, which would have been helpful if they hadn't gotten distracted by a fascinating temporal paradox in their own equation. The Phylaxians started humming in harmonics that translated roughly to "we told you this would happen," despite never having actually told anyone this would happen. Meanwhile, the human crew was doing what humans do best in crisis situations, improvising wildly, while maintaining an appropriate level of calm. The chief was already pulling up diagnostic readouts on equipment that was theoretically designed to monitor stellar output, but was now displaying the cosmic equivalent of a flat line. His second-in-command had started brewing coffee, because apparently imminent solar system collapse was no excuse for skipping the afternoon caffeine ritual. It was during this perfectly reasonable response to universal darkness that Earth's deep space monitoring arrays, suddenly freed from the overwhelming electromagnetic interference of their own star, began picking up something extraordinary. The readings were so unusual that the automated systems initially flagged them as equipment malfunction, then as probable alien invasion, then as possible reality breakdown, before finally settling on data too weird for classification. The human crew received the transmission approximately 4 minutes after Sol went dark, which was roughly 3 minutes and 50 seconds before any alien civilization managed to stop arguing about proper emergency response protocols long enough to look at their own sensors. The message was brief, clinical, and absolutely terrifying in its implications. Something roughly the size of Earth's moon was sitting behind where the sun used to be, and it was definitely not supposed to be there. The object appeared on their screens like a cosmic magic trick. One moment the sensors showed empty space where a star should be. The next they revealed a structure that made alien megaprojects look like children's building blocks. It was clearly artificial, constructed from materials that absorbed light in ways that suggested either advanced technology or fundamental physics, having a nervous breakdown. The surface was covered in geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, not because they were bright, but because they seemed to exist in more dimensions than human eyes were equipped to process. The consortium's response was predictably efficient. They immediately began forming a committee to establish protocols for investigating potentially hostile ancient artifacts. The committee formation process would take approximately 6 galactic standard weeks, assuming no one objected to the proposed committee structure during the mandatory review period. The humans, displaying their characteristic disregard for proper procedure, decided to take a closer look immediately. "Well," said the chief, studying readouts that indicated the structure was not only artificial, but actively scanning their little maintenance station, "that's definitely not in the owner's manual. Should we report this to the consortium?" asked his second-in-command, whose finger was hovering over the emergency communication array. "Probably, but let's see what it wants first. No point bothering them if it's just saying hello." This attitude, which alien psychologists would later classify as either supreme confidence or clinical insanity, led the human crew to do something that violated approximately 47 different galactic safety protocols. They sent a standard maintenance ping to the ancient structure, using the same communication array they used to request spare parts from supply stations. The response was immediate, and in retrospect, should have been their first clue that they were dealing with something that found human logic refreshingly familiar. Instead of the elaborate ceremonial greetings that galactic protocol demanded for first contact with potentially ancient intelligences, the structure sent back what could only be described as a cosmic chuckle, followed by a data stream that bypassed every known encryption protocol and downloaded directly into their maintenance computers. The data package contained what appeared to be an instruction manual, though calling it that was like calling the Encyclopedia Britannica a pamphlet. It was written in a language that human translation software somehow understood perfectly, despite the fact that it predated human civilization by several million years. The opening line read, "Congratulations on your refreshingly direct approach to stellar maintenance. Please proceed to Testing Bay 7 for competency evaluation." Testing Bay 7 turned out to be roughly the size of Texas, and contained what could generously be described as the galaxy's most elaborate obstacle course. The ancient structure had apparently been designed as some sort of cosmic examination hall, complete with challenges that tested everything from basic engineering principles to advanced metaphysical concepts. According to the downloaded documentation, every species seeking true galactic citizenship was required to demonstrate their worthiness through a series of trials that had been carefully calibrated by the galaxy's previous inhabitants. The consortium, upon learning of this development through their standard information sharing protocols, immediately began the process of organizing an expedition. This involved forming a preliminary committee to assess the feasibility of forming a secondary committee that would establish guidelines for the primary committee responsible for actually planning the expedition. The estimated timeline for this process was approximately 18 months, assuming optimal bureaucratic conditions and no major philosophical disagreements about the nature of testing. The humans, who had apparently missed the memo about proper expedition planning protocols, were already inside the testing facility. They had arrived using the maintenance shuttle, a vehicle that alien engineers considered a crime against aerodynamics but which had the distinct advantage of actually working. The testing bay welcomed them with a series of holographic displays that materialized in mid-air, showing complex mathematical equations, philosophical paradoxes, and engineering challenges that had presumably stumped previous civilization. The first test involved solving a quantum mechanics problem that required understanding the relationship between consciousness and reality at the subatomic level. The mathematical notation alone contained symbols that existed only in theoretical space, and the correct answer was supposed to demonstrate a species' readiness to transcend physical limitation. The human crew looked at it for approximately 30 seconds, before the chief reached into his toolkit and pulled out a multimeter. "Well, it's definitely quantum," he announced after taking some readings that the testing facility's sensors registered as impossible. "But the phase variance is all wrong. Hand me that adjustable wrench." What followed was a practical demonstration of quantum mechanics that would have made theoretical physicists weep. Instead of solving the consciousness paradox through philosophical contemplation, the humans simply recalibrated the quantum field generators,
using the same troubleshooting methodology they applied to malfunctioning coffee machines. The test completion chime played with what sounded distinctly like surprised approval. The second challenge presented them with a diplomatic scenario involving 7 different species with incompatible biological requirements, contradictory cultural taboos, and a shared living space roughly the size of a broom closet. Previous test takers had apparently spent decades developing elaborate psychological frameworks and cultural exchange programs. The human solution involved installing better ventilation and establishing a rotation schedule. "Look," explained the second in command to the holographic simulation, "the methane breathers get Tuesday through Thursday, the silicon-based life forms take the weekend when temperature controls can run hotter, and everyone else shares the rest of the week. Install some air scrubbers, add a few privacy partitions, and put up a chore chart. Problem solved." The testing facility's response was a sound that roughly translated to cosmic bewilderment, followed by another approval chime. By the time the consortium's Emergency Expedition Planning Committee had finished forming its preliminary assessment subcommittee, the human crew had completed 17 tests that had previously taken other species anywhere from years to centuries to solve. Their methodology remained consistent: ignore the theoretical implications, identify the actual problem, and fix it using whatever tools were available. The ancient facility seemed to find this approach not just acceptable, but oddly nostalgic. Each successful test completion was accompanied by what could only be described as electronic amusement, as if the testing system itself was rediscovering the simple pleasure of problems that got solved instead of endlessly analyzed. The consortium, monitoring these developments through their emergency observation protocols, had progressed from panic to bewilderment, to a kind of horrified fascination. According to their understanding of galactic evolution, species were supposed to become more sophisticated over time, developing complex philosophical frameworks and transcendent technological approaches. Humans appeared to be evolving backward, becoming more practical and direct with each generation. It was exactly what the testing facility had been waiting for. The final test materialized as the human crew completed their 17th consecutive challenge, and it was different from all the others in one crucial respect. It didn't pretend to be about testing anything. Instead, a holographic figure appeared in the center of the testing bay, roughly humanoid in shape but constructed from what appeared to be crystallized starlight. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of eons, and the unmistakable tone of someone who had been waiting far too long to deliver a punchline. "Greetings," it said with the kind of formal politeness that preceded either good news or cosmic annihilation. "I am the final assessment protocol of the predecessor archive, and I have been monitoring your species' approach to our evaluation system with considerable interest." The chief, who had learned to be suspicious of anything that introduced itself with a title longer than his own name, set down his plasma wrench but kept it within easy reach. "Let me guess. We failed because we didn't follow proper procedure." "On the contrary," the hologram replied, and its expression somehow managed to convey both ancient wisdom and barely contained amusement. "You have achieved the most comprehensive test completion in approximately 4 million years. Your species has demonstrated exactly the qualities we were designed to identify." This statement was followed by what galactic historians would later record as the longest pause in interstellar communication history, during which every monitoring civilization simultaneously tried to process the implications of humans being cosmically significant for positive reason. "The thing is," the hologram continued, apparently enjoying the dramatic tension, "this facility wasn't built to test technological advancement or philosophical sophistication. We already had plenty of species that excelled at those things. What we were looking for was something considerably rarer: practical intelligence, coupled with the ability to solve problems without getting lost in the theoretical implications." The archive's explanation unfolded like a cosmic joke that had been 4 million years in the making. The predecessors, it turned out, had been remarkably similar to humans in their approach to universal problems. They had built their galactic civilization, not through transcendent philosophical insights or dimensional mathematics, but through the simple expedient of figuring out what was broken and fixing it. They had achieved technological marvels, not by understanding the deeper meaning of existence, but by being really, really good at making things work. "We built this archive," the hologram explained, "because we realized our civilization had become a victim of its own success. As we grew more advanced, we became more cautious. As we became more knowledgeable, we became more paralyzed by the implications of our knowledge. We started spending centuries debating the ethics of actions that our ancestors would have completed before lunch. The human crew exchanged glances that roughly translated to, well, that sounds familiar. They had, after all, spent the better part of the last century watching their own civilization tie itself in knots over increasingly elaborate solutions to problems that could be solved with a screwdriver and some common sense. The final generation of our species, the archive continued, spent so much time contemplating the perfect solution to stellar engineering that they forgot to maintain the stars they already control. Their last act was to build this facility and wait for a species that approached cosmic problems the way we used to, by actually solving them. The revelation hit the Galactic Consortium like a diplomatic incident in a neutronium mine. According to their most fundamental assumptions about cosmic evolution, advanced civilizations were supposed to transcend crude physical problem-solving in favor of elegant theoretical frameworks. The entire structure of galactic society was built on the principle that older meant wiser, more complex meant more advanced, and taking time to properly consider all implications was the mark of true intelligence. Humans had just been told they were the inheritors of galactic civilization, because they hit things with wrenches until they worked. The archive's holographic representative seemed to read their confusion with something approaching paternal amusement. Your species has demonstrated the three essential qualities we were seeking. First, the ability to identify actual problems instead of theoretical ones. Second, the willingness to attempt solutions even when those solutions might be imperfect. Third, and most importantly, the capacity to treat complex systems as collections of simpler systems that can be understood and repaired. As if to demonstrate this point, the archive began downloading its complete technical specifications to the human maintenance computer. The data stream contained the engineering principles behind stellar management, galactic energy distribution, and what appeared to be the complete maintenance manual for keeping an entire spiral arm running smoothly. The information was presented not as transcendent cosmic wisdom, but as a practical guide, written by beings who understood that the universe was essentially a very large machine that occasionally needed percussive maintenance. The current galactic civilizations, the archive noted with what might have been cosmic disappointment, have become excellent at administration and terrible at actual problem solving. They have built a society so sophisticated that it can no longer accomplish anything that requires getting its hands dirty. While this conversation was taking place, the consortium's emergency response had progressed to forming a committee to investigate the formation of committees that might eventually address the solar crisis. Their estimated response time had been adjusted to 3 months, assuming no major procedural objections. The humans, meanwhile, had absorbed the archive's technical data and immediately began applying it to the problem at hand. The stellar regulator, it turned out, had not actually broken Sol so much as temporarily disconnected it from the galactic energy grid. The fix involved a procedure that the archive's documentation described as elementary maintenance requiring basic competency in multi-dimensional engineering. So, the chief said, studying schematics that showed Sol's energy signature rerouted through 17 different dimensional substrates, we basically need to turn it back on. Essentially, yes, confirmed the archive's representative, though I should warn you that reactivating a stellar mass after grid disconnection typically requires. The chief had already started the reactivation sequence. Sol blazed back to life with the enthusiasm of a star that had just received the cosmic equivalent of a factory reset. The light reached Earth approximately 8 minutes later, illuminating a planet where several billion humans had spent the last few hours making jokes about early bedtime and wondering if this qualified them for hazard pay. The Galactic Consortium, still deep in committee formation protocols, suddenly found themselves dealing with a restored star and a species that had just been handed the keys to cosmic infrastructure. Their response was to immediately begin forming a committee to investigate the proper procedures for dealing with species that solved galaxy-level problems faster than committees could be formed to address them. The archive's final transmission to the human crew contained complete access codes to the Galactic Energy Management System, ownership documentation for 17 stellar engineering facilities, and what appeared to be a user manual for maintaining galactic civilization. The closing message was brief and somehow managed to convey both cosmic significance and practical advice. Try not to break anything important, but don't be afraid to fix things that are already broken. The galaxy needs more mechanics and fewer philosophers. As normal daylight returned to Earth and the consortium began the lengthy process of updating their administrative charts to reflect humanity's new status as galactic maintenance supervisors, the narrator of this cosmic comedy couldn't help but observe the perfect irony of the situation. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had spent millennia becoming too sophisticated to function, while the species that still needed warning labels on toasters had just inherited responsibility for keeping the universe running. Somewhere in the consortium's headquarters, a junior filing clerk was probably updating the administrative status of Sol from secondary oversight zone to primary maintenance hub under human supervision, blissfully unaware that their original decimal point error had just accidentally solved a 4 million-year-old succession crisis. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all.